Step into the squared circle, where the bell echoes through decades, where main events become legends and tag teams tore the house down. From the undercard to the top of the card, this is Portland Wrestling at its finest. One ring, one city, 1,000 stories. This is Ringside in Rose City. And here's your hosts, Frank Culbertson and Mike Rodgers.
Hey, thanks, Lisa. Always setting the tone just right every single time. I'm Frank Culbertson alongside Portland Wrestling historian
Mike Rodgers.
And this is Ringside in Rose City. One ring, one city, and 1,000 stories. And they're all rooted right here in Portland. If you're here for the history of Portland wrestling, the larger-than-life characters, the electric crowds, and the chaos that happen inside the ropes, and the cards that actually filled the Portland Sports Arena week after week, you're in the exact right place. Now, as our listeners know, Mike and I don't come into these shows with a script in hand. We don't pick the topic. Lisa does, because she controls the ringside wheel, and the ringside wheel controls the show. And Mike and I, well, we just try to hang on for the ride. So, Lisa, if you would, give that wheel a spin, and where it lands, only Lisa and the wheel knows. All right, Lisa, the ringside wheel has spoken. Bring that envelope over here, and let's see where we're headed tonight.
Here you go.
Oh, Mike, this is interesting. The wheel is going to move us forward again. We're heading into January of 1969 at the Portland Sports Arena and throughout the state of Oregon. Now, last time we were here, we wrapped up December of 1968, and that was a great month. You had the Von Steigers right in the middle of everything, reclaiming the tag team titles. You had Billy White Wolf finishing up his run here so he could head off to Japan. You had Luther Lindsay continuing to be one of the most steady and truly dominant figures in the territory. And you had some packed houses at the arena, including that very special Christmas night capacity crowd. And maybe more importantly, Mike, you could see that things were starting to shift. There were some new faces coming in, others were heading out, and the groundwork was being laid for what was coming next. Because if December, as we said, felt like the end of one chapter, January of 69 feels like the beginning of another. And from what we've seen, this is where things really need to start to gel and get interesting and really need to start getting chaotic. So, Mike, we've turned the calendar. We're into a new year. Take us back to the Portland Sports Arena and what was happening in January of 1969 as things, instead of heating up, freeze instead.
In January of 1969, there was some big weather that came into the Northwest. You know, we usually get one snowstorm a year, and that will be 3, 4, 5 inches. This storm that happened at this time got up to 15 inches of snow accumulated. And I'm a youngster, 9 years old. I live in Seaside, which is, of course, on the coast of Oregon. And I can remember this time period very clearly because my mother had just gotten married and we were preparing to move and leave out of Oregon. But our leaving day was postponed because of this weather. Yeah, it was at least a foot in Seaside, which doesn't usually get this snow accumulation. As we look at wrestling, they have a big card scheduled on January 1st for Portland. It's going to be a battle royal. And one of the very few times Portland has to postpone their card, they have to cancel this card on this night. That is really troubling for Don Owen because this is going to be a really big show. And we've addressed that he's just recently moved into the Portland Sports Arena. He owes money on this card. He needs all of his cards to be strong.
And it was coming off as we mentioned, the capacity crowd on Christmas Day. So there was a little momentum. And this was a 16-man battle royal. It was the biggest battle royal in Portland wrestling history for a purse of $1,000, which doesn't sound like much today, but back then, that was quite a bit of money. And it was called the Big Snow of 68. Portland temperatures that day, a low of 8 and a high skyrocketing all the way up to 10. That's some balmy weather. It was the coldest day on record in downtown Portland since 1919, and it truly did shut down Portland. Now, for those of our listeners who are not in the Portland area, you mentioned that we get 3 to 5 inches of snow. That shuts the city down. The schools close.
Yep.
We see people in New York and in Chicago, and they're like normal for us. Just a couple inches is nothing. They go with feet of snow and still keep going. That is not what happens in Portland, Oregon, is it? Schools shut down, and as a teacher, you love those days.
Yes, I do. I do love those days. We had one day 25 years ago where there was no snow on the ground, but we had an extremely strong wind chill. The winds were just coming so strong. And when I say extreme, it was 30 below with the wind chill. And so we couldn't have kids out at the bus stops for that. And so school was canceled for 2 or 3 days. The driving conditions were fine. It was just so extremely cold.
And those of us that know Mike and how he loved to do promos on the kids, that would have been a great day for you to be at school and tell the kids, get outside, go on, cut your promos and forcing them outside so you could have your quiet time as a teacher.
Yes.
And I-5, which runs from Portland, Salem, Eugene, was closed for several hours that day, but it did open up enough for them to have a card on the second in Salem. And so, Mike, talk about that card, because there was one person who worked a few times.
Well, let's see. We've got in the main event, Luther Lindsay beats Kurt von Steiger. Carl von Steiger beats Sandy Barr. Carl von Steiger comes back to face Cowboy Kirk, and Carl von Steiger is disqualified. So Carl von Steiger really has a successful night.
Yes, he does.
And then Haru Suzuki goes to a draw with Luigi Massera.
And that was a 2 out of 3 fall match, which I'm not taking anything away from Haru Suzuki and Luigi Massera. Guys I enjoyed watching, but that's not the 2 out of 3 fall match that I want to see. But because of the weather, Tony Bourne and Eric Froelich, who were scheduled, couldn't get to the matches. And so Carl had to do, well, not even just double duty, he had triple duty. Because in the main event, where Lindsay kept the Northwest title over Kurt von Steiger after 2 or 3 falls, Kurt won the first fall with a flying body drop off the ropes. Lindsay won the second fall with a half crab, despite what the paper said, the German pulling the Negro's head over his head repeatedly. Remember, we're still in the late 60s, and language like that was okay in the paper. And in the third fall, I can picture this as I read it. Lindsay won the third fall when he hooked his legs on the top rope while the von Steiger was attempting a body slam, causing von Steiger to fall over backwards with Lindsay on top of him for the pin. That's a great finish. And then after Lindsay won, Carl, who had nothing else to do, ran in, and Kurt and Carl beat down Lindsay and referee Shag Thomas, which would set up some future tag matches. But sometimes when weather is like that, wrestlers have to do what they have to do to keep the crowd and the matches moving, don't they, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at this card as a whole, comparing it in the history of the Northwest, we've got Luigi Massera, Haru Suzuki, Sandy Barr, Luther Lindsay. These guys have been in the Northwest quite a while, to the point where we look at this window of time and quite a few of the wrestlers are stale. They've been here for a while. We're on the verge of new chapters starting as the month goes on. But at this moment, I look at this card and it's not really very compelling. But again, like you mentioned, new chapters are about ready to open up here.
And those new chapters continue on the 3rd in Eugene, because the Von Steigers, who had won the Northwest Tag titles on the first night of the sports arena and had recaptured them recently, they lost the tag titles in Eugene to Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas. And we've seen Shag not only be the referee, but get involved even as a referee in matches with the Von Steigers. So this made an absolutely solid team, Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas, didn't it?
Yeah, they're one of the teams that, when you think of the most memorable teams in Northwest history, Shag and Luther come to mind because they did have a history of teaming. They held the Northwest Tag titles definitely on more than one occasion. They've pulled out 2 on this run, and I think at least 1 other prior title run. So they are a well-established team.
And also on this card of note is Eric Froelich, who finally was able to shovel his way out of his driveway, or whatever reason Eric Froelich had for not showing up, besides just probably being afraid to wrestle on the card.
Oh,
Eric Froelich beat Tony Bourne by DQ. So we're starting to see Tony Bourne do that heel turn, because on the next night in Portland, someone returns, and that really sets the wheels in motion, Mike.
So just a little backstory on Tony Bourne. We had Lonnie Main and Tony Bourne as a very, very solid tag team in 1968. They break up. Tony Bourne becomes the babyface and has probably a 6-month run as a babyface, which is very unusual because he's been the heel throughout the 1960s. He's setting up this turn. Now he's disqualified against Eric Froelich in a match 3 months prior. Would have been a draw, or Tony probably would have won outright, even as a babyface.
Let's talk about that card because Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay win the 16-man battle royal. It was, as we mentioned, the largest in Portland history. And so you see that formula that Portland has where sometimes the top two faces split the battle royal. And in this case, as tag team partners, it elevates them in the fans' eyes, doesn't it?
Yes. And this is January 4th. They've moved that January 1st battle royal that they advertised. Now it's the 4th, and they're putting on this card. And this is where that big battle royal. And one of the really interesting things are the wrestlers who don't have a regular match, but are in the battle royal. And I did not realize this. I think we had mentioned Bobby Shane had been in Portland on one occasion in the Portland Sports Arena. And as we really examine it, this would be his second appearance in the Portland Sports Arena. And it went kind of unnoticed because he was in that battle royal, didn't win the battle royal, and didn't have a singles match. So Bobby Shane is in this battle royal. Don Leo Jonathan is in the battle royal. And Dean Higuchi is in the battle royal. 3 top names coming from Vancouver to help fill out the card.
Yeah, and that battle royal, those are really top names in Portland. And it mentioned in Vancouver, as Dutch Savage is coming in, he's in the battle royal. Don Leo not winning the battle royal is kind of a surprise to me.
Right.
But having Shag and Luther win and actually throwing out one of the Von Steigers at the very end makes good sense. That was a great card. The return of that night was really by Lonnie Main, who beat Cowboy Kirk.
So Lonnie Main has been gone for 3-4 months. And returning here, he's still a heel. Tony Bourne has set the table for turning back into a heel. We're going to have to wait and see if they get together. But yeah, also Johnny Heidelman, a veteran journeyman heel, has made his debut on this card. And of course, Eric Froelich took him to town, of course. And Johnny Costas is there. He has not been in the Northwest in the last little bit of time. Dutch Savage beats Johnny Costas on it. This is a great card. So much talent, as you look at that battle royal as well.
So the weather in the Northwest, especially in Eastern Oregon at this time, is still very snowy. Parts of the gorge that go east were closed from time to time from the snow or from the giant winds, as you mentioned, that go through the gorge. So they don't wrestle a lot for the next coming days. There was a fundraiser scheduled in Jefferson, Oregon, a very small town. I have not found any results for that. But they do go back down to Salem on the 9th, and that's a tremendous card. And the paper lists in the advertisement as an angry Lonnie Main returns. Why was he angry, and who was he angry at?
So this is interesting because they've kept this, they remind us what happened a few months previous. Lonnie Main had been the singles champion. He's injured by the Von Steigers. Lonnie leaves. Beauregard defends the singles title against Luther Lindsay. Luther Lindsay wins. Beauregard leaves, which is interesting because that's who Lonnie Main is. The paper suggests he's mad at. And Beauregard's not in the territory right now, which is wonderful foreshadowing, or, promoters have their fingers crossed if they ever get Beauregard back in the territory. So that's a wonderful bit of booking. Lonnie is mad at Beauregard. He's mad at Luther Lindsay, who took his title. It's interesting, he's not very mad at the Von Steigers, which he should be, but I guess they're on the back burner a little bit as well. But Lonnie's mad, and he's mad at a lot of people.
That's right. And Tony Bourne continues his heel turn, as he says in the paper that he's mad that he's been regulated, as he said, to preliminary matches, and promises fans will start to see the real Tony Bourne tonight, and he will start winning any way he can from here on out. I don't think that's foreshadowing a heel turn. That's really just shoving it in your face, isn't it?
Yeah, I imagine it is. And he gets the win over Johnny War Eagle, who hadn't appeared on the previous few cards, which is interesting as well. And then we have Eric Froelich, of course, capturing a big win over Haru Suzuki.
Yes, we'll give him that. So in the main event, where Lonnie Main beats Bruce Kirk 2 out of 3 falls with knee drops, because if you remember one of Lonnie's moves, that was the knee drop. He was really the only one using the knee drop at the time. Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas beat Kurt and Carl von Steiger by DQ. Now, Lindsay lost the first fall, but came back and beat Carl in the second fall with his Dark Cloud. Now, Lindsay uses the Dark Cloud. Later on, we'll see that Shag Thomas uses the Dark Cloud. Mike, what is the Dark Cloud?
I'm going to have to speculate and give an educated guess here. I would imagine that it's some sort of a headbutt. It's not the full Nelson.
It's not. That is true. In the third fall, the Von Steigers tried to get that tag team switch up behind the ref's back, but Luigi Massera, being the great referee he was, caught him and DQ'd them. And Tony Bourne, you mentioned him, was booed all night, and he used the cannonball off the top rope to beat Johnny War Eagle. That was Tony Bourne's move that nobody else was doing off the top rope, were they?
Right, exactly. And interesting because Tony Bourne is not a spring chicken at this moment. And it would be interesting to try to figure out how many times in Tony Bourne's career he did this move, because there were many times he landed it. There were many times he missed it. And that just could not have been easy on his body.
No. And I can hear Frank Bonham, as you mentioned it, as the opponent rolls out of the way, and Frank Bonham was saying, "Nobody's home." And Tony sold it like crazy, because he really did hit that move hard on the mat. That was a great one. They go down to Eugene the next night, and Lonnie Main beat Johnny War Eagle. The Von Steigers regained their Northwest Tag titles when Luther Lindsay was counted out of the ring as he lay unconscious on the floor. And this is one of those issues that Portland, sometimes the rules changed, and the tag team could change hands on a count out on a match like that, whereas in later years, that didn't happen.
Interesting. It's changed twice in Eugene on subsequent weeks. Really, really interesting here. They're exchanging the tag titles around very frequently.
So something that you mentioned comes into play here, and that's with Lonnie Main and the Von Steigers, because in Portland on the 11th, Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay beat the Von Steigers by DQ when Lonnie Main jumped into the ring during the third fall and attacked Luther Lindsay, who you mentioned he was mad at. But the Von Steigers, the papers say, was clearly winning the match when Main jumped in. Referee Bill Savage then DQ'd the Von Steigers, who then are mad at Main for interfering. How great a booking is this, and what's it set up in the future?
That is such good booking, because Lonnie has an issue with the Von Steigers from the previous months. It appears he's more mad at Luther Lindsay at the moment, so he attacks them, but then the Von Steigers are not happy. Lonnie didn't attack Lindsay on their behalf. He attacked Lindsay on Lonnie's behalf. He had his own agenda there. And so, the Von Steigers are not happy, which sets up possible matches with Lonnie and the Von Steigers, which is a natural.
And because we'll know shortly that Main and Bourne are going to get back together as a team. And so the Von Steigers versus Main and Bourne, those are classic matches that I can remember from the very early 70s. Those guys really had some great matches.
And classic, Portland loves heel versus heel. That there's always, the excitement always gets ratcheted up just a little bit when it's heel versus heel.
And the commission, though, was not happy with Lonnie Main, and they warned Main he would face indefinite suspension if he continues to interfere in other matches. We'll see if that really happened. So then on the 16th, they go back down to Salem. Okay, Mike, I just got you to follow along for the stipulations. The match is Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay versus Kurt and Carl Von Steigers in a winner-take-all non-title match, which is very interesting. Now, all 4 men will be tied to separate corners at the beginning of the match by their left wrist. And when they work free, or any of them work free, they can then beat on their opponent, so are still tied up. Only the first fall is started this way. The other falls are regular tag team rules. So I guess if you are still tied up at the end of the first fall, they're going to untie you because it goes to regular tag team rules. And this will now become known as the German Death Match. Mike, is this the first definition of a German death match like this? And what does it remind you of to come later in Portland wrestling history?
Yeah, this is the first time I can ever recall these stipulations anywhere. I've never really heard of this before. And what an interesting concept. Everybody's tied into a corner. Now, 15 years later, we will have a similar stipulation match in Portland, and that was called an Iranian death match. And Sheikh Ali Hassan was the kind of king of this match, and he had quite a few matches with Brett Sawyer. But this is a tag team where all four are tied in. Very, very interesting concept.
And in those matches with Sawyer, Hussein always got untied first and would go over and absolutely bloody Sawyer up, who we know didn't mind bleeding, but it really got sympathy from the fans and heat for Hassan, didn't it?
Right, exactly. Yeah, the match really wouldn't have worked if the babyface gets loose first.
Right. Now, going back to December, we had heard of some German death matches, which, as we now look back, we would actually call them Texas death matches, but they were calling them German death matches, but they were not handled this way. But Mike, here's what happened in this one. Again, it's Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay against Kurt and Carl von Steiger. And we know what's happened in the earlier week when Lonnie Main ran in. Well, in this one, Lonnie's taking it all that the commission's going to give him because he runs in during the first fall while everybody's still tied up. He clobbers Lindsay, who's still tied to the ring post, and makes him an easy pin for the von Steigers, who get loose. That's just really getting Lonnie a lot of heat with the fans, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And again, what fantastic booking for Lonnie to come in and attack somebody while they're tied up. It serves everything you're trying to do. It gets more heat on Lonnie, reminds the fans he's been gone for a few months, what a dastardly person he is. Gets sympathy for Lindsay. Not only is he attacked, he's attacked while he's tied up. It's wonderful booking.
And Lindsay is Northwest Heavyweight Champion, having beat Beauregard for the title. And so Lonnie is naturally mad at him, and he's just coming in, and he wants a title match, and Lindsay hasn't given him to him yet because he's busy with the Von Steigers. But this is the way to really make Lindsay say, I got to do something about that. So that's the first fall. The second fall, everybody's untied. Lindsay and Shag won, quote unquote, on their own merits with the dark cloud on Carl. Again, whatever that is, the headbutts maybe. And in the third fall, Eric Froelich. Oh my gosh, Eric Froelich.
Here we go. We're doing some business now.
Eric Froelich jumped into the ring to help Lindsay and Shag. And while Froelich entered the ring, referee Bruce Kirk was outside the ring looking after Lindsay. Froelich, dressed in street clothes, of course, knocked the German flat, then drop kicked the other. Then Lindsay rolled back in and pinned Kurt von Steiger. Mike, what is Eric Froelich doing?
Why did this not elevate Eric Froelich into one of the all-time great Portland wrestlers, rocket him into the main events?
And you think about how much sense that would make, as we've talked about him having to be in from Germany. And so you would have had the two evil Germans with Eric Froelich, the good German. That seems like some natural booking, but it just never came because I don't see Eric in this kind of role in tag team action. Do you?
I snuck ahead here to the next Salem card. Are the Germans going to get, so spoiler alert, we just jumped ahead a week and we're going to go back. The main event on the 23rd in Salem is Luther Lindsay. It's a 6-man tag. Luther Lindsay, Shag Thomas, and Cowboy Kirk. Eric Froelich is not on this card. Why, out of curiosity, why wasn't Cowboy Kirk the person to interfere? I don't know. That's a mystery.
And we've had that before when we thought Shag Thomas should be the third person in a 6-man, and it was Stan Stasiak instead. So interesting how they do that. Lonnie Main defeats Luigi Massera in 2 or 3 falls and then challenges Luther for his title. And we'll see what Luther has to say about that. But then they go to the 17th in Eugene. And this is something that I don't remember Portland having done before. And that was a loggers match. Is this the first loggers match that you can remember, Mike, at least in the Portland Sports Arena era?
Yeah, logger match, lumberjack match. Yeah, I don't remember any previously And then, a tag match, usually a logger match or a lumberjack match is kind of designed for a singles match. So yeah, this is unique, especially with it being a tag match.
And interestingly, Tony Bourne is the special ref. Now, I wasn't there sitting third row. You weren't there sitting first row, like always. But you can imagine Tony being the heel and having issues with the Von Steigers and having issues with Luther Lindsay and Shag Thomas because he knows he's looking out for his soon-to-be partner, Lonnie Main. You can imagine there had to be some shenanigans pulled by the referee, don't you think?
Yeah, I can't imagine which way he's going to go, but I would doubt that he called it right down the middle.
And so you mentioned headbutts, and let's talk about that for a minute. You called the Dark Cloud maybe headbutts. Absolutely could have been. But headbutts at this time, again, another rule change. Headbutts were illegal at this time. So the wrestlers were having to do the headbutts like Shag and Luther when the referee wasn't looking, which usually is a heel move. But in this case, in this particular time period in January, headbutts were illegal, as we'll see here in this match. And that is in Portland. Shag Thomas and Luther Lindsay beat the Von Steigers in a non-title match when Shag headbutted Kurt for the third fall. And he did it while the ref was pushing Carl out of the ring so that the referee couldn't see it.
This is really interesting. I didn't remember that headbutts were illegal. I'm wondering if somehow, some way, the Von Steigers or some other heels pushed the issue, in storyline fashion to get the headbutts to illegal, because shortly thereafter, they are legal once again, because I never remember them being illegal. So yeah, real interesting. Again, a interesting booking twist.
And headbutts had played a part in Portland wrestling. If we look at Katie Bar the Door, The History of Portland Wrestling, Mike, have you heard about that book?
I have heard about that book. I believe it might be available on Amazon.
It is on Amazon, and every wrestling fan should have it. We really cover Portland wrestling, or I should say you really cover Portland wrestling in that book from the 1960s on. But headbutts had been a thing where certain wrestlers would then start wearing masks to try to protect themselves from the headbutts. So here it is again, using a stipulation to come back and create that story where the Von Steigers think they're pulling one over, but actually the good guys find a way around the rule, which is smart. Although bending the rules, Mike, Cowboy Kirk beat Haru Sasaki by DQ. What was Sasaki doing that got him DQ'd?
I'm sure he was either throwing salt, or Haru would always use that maneuver where he'd put his ankle over his opponent's throat and have that blocked by his body as he would beg off to the referee. I never got tired of that move.
You missed one that Haru used to do.
Karate.
He got disqualified for using karate chops, which we know were illegal. Why do we know they were illegal?
Judo is obviously legal. It's karate with the open fingers. So dangerous.
So dangerous.
Absolutely illegal.
Frank Bonomo would tell us that over and over. And in 1969, I'm just about to turn 11, and you're a year or two younger. But that really got over to us that karate was really deadly, didn't it?
Especially a few years in the future when etched into my memory, Mr. Fuji used karate kicks.
Oh,
good grief. I've never seen the carnage.
Oh. Now, I do want to mention one of your favorite guys again, Eric Froelich, because the paper says Lonnie Main beat Eric Froelich, and this is what the paper says, in an easy one-fall match.
No, that paper, that's fake news.
I don't think I've ever seen a description of a match like, even on squash matches, which Portland didn't do often, but this was an easy one-fall match.
They're trying to get Lonnie over, and Eric Froelich had a job to do.
And then they go to, you mentioned the coast in Seaside. This is on the 22nd in Coos Bay, and it's a German death match. It's the Von Steigers versus Johnny War Eagle and Tony Bourne, where all wrestlers are tied to the corner. Mike, explain that booking to me.
That's interesting because this is what usually would happen on the coast. There'd be a monthly town, and sometimes they'd set up a match for the future a month in advance, and maybe things hadn't been planned out that well, or the details hadn't been noticed. So here we are with Tony Bourne and Johnny War Eagles, who are not tag team partners, as Tony Bourne is full-fledged heel now. So they're just going to have to make do, or they're going to have to make some substitutions.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it was weather related or not. Coos Bay is on the coast, known for fishing. Mike, had you ever gone fishing out of Coos Bay?
I've never gone fishing out of Coos Bay. I've been to Coos Bay, one of the few places I did not fish.
But if you had fished, what were you going to fish for, Mike?
Oh, I would fish for salmon, and I would absolutely give it to Dutch Savage.
Absolutely. And if you haven't heard those stories, you got to go back and listen to Ringside in Rose City's early episodes where Mike is giving Dutch Savage salmon because Dutch asked for it.
He's not even in the territory, and I'd give it to him.
Mike, while we're talking salmon, you hear that music. And so it's kind of seafood related because you see Lisa, she's pulled out her grass skirt and her leis once again, so you know what that means. It's time for Island Interlude. So we're going to leave the cold, very snowy streets of Portland behind, at least for a few minutes, and head somewhere a little bit warmer, a little bit sunnier, but just as wild inside the ropes. So grab a seat, maybe a pineapple drink. Lisa is passing those out here shortly, and maybe slow sips because I know how strong she makes her drinks. Because we're hopping across the Pacific and stepping into the wrestling scene in Hawaii, 1969. Mike, take us to the islands.
Oh my gosh, so much talent here. And the cards are so good. And we're right in that window of time. There is so much talent. And this is the kind of the time period where I quizzed Lord Blair's when I had an interview with him. And it's like, he reiterated to me time and time again, it's whoever is the local talent is drawing the money. So you have Ed Francis and Ripper Collins, and they are in a feud here. And as we look at the rest of the card, Nick Bockwinkel, Luke Graham, Neff Maivia, Mr. Fuji, they're the regulars. But we've got Fred Blassie filling out the card, and Tex McKenzie gets a win over Fred Blassie. Fred Blassie isn't really figured into Hawaii right at this time. He's just filling out the cards, and speculation is he's either going to Japan or coming back from Japan. But these cards are just unbelievable.
And so since we're talking about Portland prior to this is January of 1969 in Honolulu. And look at that Portland connection that is either has been there or will come to Portland. You mentioned Ed Francis. You got Ripper Collins, Mr. Fuji. Red Bastien is on this card. Tex McKenzie, Nick Bockwinkel, who had a run here in Portland. That's an amazing Portland connection. But Mike, what's new with Ed Francis? Because he had been a promoter.
And he had not wrestled throughout the decade of the 1960s. And he comes back into action here during this little window of time. He's feuding with Ripper Collins. When this run gets over, he claims that he's going to leave the wrestling to his sons.
Yes, he does claim that. And so mentioning his sons, because they were really all over the Hawaiian newspapers. You had, of course, Bill, who was captain of I believe it's Kailua, however you pronounce that, wrestling team. Russ, who was only called Russell in the papers as a sports star in football, basketball, and wrestling. Russell was undefeated on the wrestling team. And Bob, who was also on the team. Mike, I'm not very familiar with Bob, but you know Bob, don't you?
Well, I believe so. When we were doing that work on the Hawaiian book, oh, yeah, the history of Hawaiian wrestling.
Hold it. Let me stop you right there. Oh, yeah, the history of Hawaii wrestling. Is that a great book or what? Where can I find that?
It's a big book. I'm hoping that people think it's a great book, and you can find that on Amazon.
That's right. It's over 500 pages, and we go back to the very beginning, early 20s, and then we have all the results from most of the wrestling cards in Hawaii. We cover Pearl Harbor. We cover the Francis. We cover the Maiavias, the Karasaks. It's a tremendous book. Every wrestling fan who wants to know about how great wrestling was in Hawaii, you hear about how great Florida wrestling is, and it was, and Georgia, and it was, and some of the guys who love the WWF, how great that was in the East, and in Cobo Arena in Detroit, great. They don't hold a candle to Hawaii wrestling on some of their cards. But let's get back to that because Ed said I'm going to take some time off. So Ed says that, and then he shows up in the paper, and he's got 2 gashes on his right cheek. He's got a golf ball size lump on his forehead, and he said numerous aches and pains. So he said, that's it. I'm going to take some time off and not wrestle again. But of course, that's not how wrestling goes. So that was a great card. That's on January of 1969. They did not have snow and have to cancel their cards.
No, they did not.
And so then something happened in January 12th of 1969, and that's Jim Haiti passes away shortly after a match. He'd been in a six-man tag with Lord Blears and Tex McKenzie against Ripper Collins and Luke Graham and Frank Allman. During the match, he complained of severe stomach issues, and afterwards he showered, said he felt better, thought maybe he had just a touch of the flu. He drove home and later collapsed, and his wife Gail called an ambulance. They transported him to a nearby hospital, but he was already dead upon arrival. Haiti was a beloved figure in wrestling in Hawaii. Mike, tell us about Jim Haiti.
Yeah, Hawaii was probably one of his biggest territories. He started in 1952. He won the NWA World Junior title 3 different times. He held the Canadian tag title with Don Leo Jonathan and Red Bastien. He had the Hawaii title twice, the Hawaii tag title 4 times with Pompero Firpo, Johnny Barand, Peter Maivia, and Billy White Wolf. And he held the U.S. title, the Hawaiian version, in late 1968. So right at the time period we're looking at, he had just lost that U.S. title. I searched through the interviews of where Haiti had been mentioned, and Red Bastien, who had been a tag partner and who was in Hawaii there on that first card in January, this is what Red Bastien had to say about Jim Haiti, that he was a heck of a wrestler. He had very good balance and timing and leverage. He was the complete wrestler. He says, unfortunately, he passed away in Hawaii. I had just left him the day before, and Bastien went to Australia. He heard that he had passed away, and it was something internally that had happened to him. He said he never really got the full story on that. And that he also mentioned that Haiti had a daughter. Just such an unfortunate incident, and I'm sure that it affected Hawaii wrestling when one of the top baby faces passes away. Such a stark bit of reality thrown into your wrestling. And Red did a good job of remembering Jim Haiti.
Yeah, and he was only 38 years old, survived by his wife and a 6-year-old daughter. Official cause of death, I have read, was a heart attack, but Jim Haiti was definitely a beloved figure. He was a regular at the Shiners Children's Hospital. He went there on a regular basis to talk to the children and cheer them up. But that's what happens sometimes in wrestling. And they did a benefit card for him, and his surviving spouse and daughter moved back to Detroit shortly after that. But that was Jim Haiti. So, Mike, let's go ahead and continue on in wrestling. And let's look at the 15th, because there's another Portland name wrestling in Hawaii at that time, isn't it?
Yeah, the name that pops out that hasn't been on the previous Honolulu cards is Rocky Montero. Rocky Montero is still a year or so away from coming to Portland. He beats Mr. Fuji. Rocky Montero was a boxer, and I had a chance to interview Montero. He reiterates that being a boxer wasn't a gimmick. He really was a boxer. He was a no-nonsense type of wrestler who started out as a heel, eventually moved in as a switch to a babyface. During his run here, Montero had a knee injury, had to have an operation. And there was a thing that would happen in Portland. At times they would have free tickets that they would pass out to fans. So we mentioned that story of I gave a salmon to Dutch Savage, and his wife wrote to me and included these free passes to Portland Wrestling. And on the back of them, it said that you would still be charged $2 a ticket because that would go to the wrestler's injury fund. Now, in this interview that I had with Rocky Montero, he talks about having to have a knee operation, and Montero inquires to Don Owen about this injury fund that's on the back of the tickets. And lo and behold, that was a work. If you can believe it, that was a work, and there was no injury fund designed for injured wrestlers. And Rocky Montero was a little bit salty about that.
A little bit salty. He joins Don Jardine on the salty list of Portland wrestlers. We should come up with a top 10 salty list of Portland wrestlers. And it's funny because they're free tickets. And, you know, a famous Portland Wrestling TV sponsor is Tom Peterson. Shout out to our friends who run the Tom Peterson Instagram page. But they say free is a very good price. But these tickets, they weren't really free. They were $2, which really wasn't much of a discount off the regular admission, to be honest. Don knew what he was doing. So let's move on to the 22nd, because that's a big card in Hawaii, because Ed Francis, who said he's not going to wrestle, Ripper Collins said stuff, and Ed had to get back in the ring.
And Ripper Collins beats Ed Francis in a cage match. This card is another example of just unbelievable talent. Professor Tanaka beats Ray Stevens. Saito and Shibuya, who were tag champs in California, world tag champs, they beat Tex McKenzie and Nick Bockwinkel. Wahoo McDaniel's on this card, beating Mr. X. Luther Lindsay's on this card, who'd been in Oregon the whole month of January. He shows up in Honolulu, and it's fun to check. Luther does make it back to Oregon the next night, which is always fun to check out. Luther beats Tosh Togo, and Montero's on this card going to a draw with Luke Graham. And Dr. Bill Miller, probably another one of those wrestlers coming or going to Japan. He goes to a draw with Don Choi.
You already mentioned Luther Lindsay, and he beats Togo in 2 straight falls, the paper said. Now, that's really unusual, because we know 2 out of 3 falls are always 1-1 and then the final. But you know why he had to win 2 in a row? Because he had a plane to catch, because he had to be in Salem the next night. And the weather in Oregon was turning terrible. And so he was on first in a 2 out of 3 falls, which isn't what usually opened up cards. But talk about Don Chewy. That's a name that wrestling fans might not know, but he was a pretty big deal for several years.
Yeah, he wrestled here in this run in Hawaii. He wrestled a little bit in Los Angeles. And if my memory serves, he also wrestled a little bit in the Nashville area. He plays 6 seasons for the Los Angeles Rams, so he's an NFL player from 1963 to 1968, and he plays 1 year with Philadelphia, and he retired from football in 1969. He's trained by Jules Strongbow, not Jay Strongbow, but Jules Strongbow from Los Angeles. And he and another NFL football player, Joe Corolla, have a run in Hawaii.
Yeah, now, since they were football players, would they be on your 6-time, 6-time, 6-time?
5-time.
I know, I'm giving you the trophy in advance for this year, fantasy football. Mike, for those listeners, is a fantasy football guru. And so if you want information on your upcoming team, send us an email and we'll get it to Mike, and he'll help you out for the low cost of $5. No, we won't mention your actual cost. But that's Don Chewy there. But you also mentioned Dr. Bill Miller. Bill Miller was a big deal, wasn't he?
He was, especially in the Midwest, Detroit area, Chicago area, just a big man. He really was a doctor. He was a doctor of veterinary medicine. He had a brother, Dan Miller, who also wrestled. But yeah, Big Bill, Dr. Bill Miller was a main eventer all around the country.
Now, the newspaper advertised this match as Ohio State versus the LA Rams. Now, people knew Miller was a great pro wrestler, but he was also 9-time letterman at Ohio State in wrestling, track, and football. He was an all-around All-American in the discus and the shot put. Discus and shot put, track. Huh. You know, Mike, that reminds me, you maybe know someone who is famous for those track events. And where can people learn about that? And tell us that story.
Sure, I'll tell you that story. We've mentioned here that I've had a career as a teacher, a PE teacher, and I actually taught Ryan Krauser, who his entire family is a track family, famous in Oregon. And Ryan Krauser, I had him in elementary school, very nice gentleman, in the elementary school up to 5th grade. He fills out immensely, becomes a very big man, excels in the shot put, and ends up winning 2 Olympic gold medals for the shot put, is considered the greatest shot put in the history of the world, which, is really exciting to think. Not that I taught him, but just that I know him.
And I know I've heard his speeches after winning, setting records, and every single time he credits you with giving him the impetus and the form, because I've seen you throw the shot put a couple of times, and your form is tremendous. And that's where Ryan got that from.
Yeah.
Where can people learn about your career as 30 years as an educator in the education system.
Yeah, did write a little book on some of the stories that I had in my teaching career. It's called Books, Balls, and Squirrel Paws, and it's available on Amazon. And I think people will get a kick out of it. There's a lot of fun stories.
There's a lot of great stories in it, and you'll hear just how education changed over the 30 years, how discipline changed in the classrooms or disappeared from the classrooms. And Mike's stories will really make you laugh, especially when he talks about the promos that he cuts on the kids. Anyway, that's a great book. Books, Balls, and Squirrel Paws. It's available on Amazon. So, Mike, let's go one more match, and that's on the 27th, and that's in Hilo, Hawaii, where they drew 1,500 people.
Yeah, looking at this card, we have the main event, Tex McKenzie beating Professor Tanaka on disqualification. And it's interesting, anytime you have Tex McKenzie around, you're going to have wrestlers ribbing him. I hate to break this to you, but Tex McKenzie was not a great worker. But at the same time, wrestlers will give him credit that Tex McKenzie could draw a house, and he was a very good draw. So here we are, we're seeing him in the main event, an exciting sounding main event against Professor Tanaka. The card fills out, even though this is essentially a spot show for Hawaii and Hilo. You have Nick Bockwinkel and Ed Francis going to a no contest with Luke Graham and Ripper Collins. Rocky Montero, surprising in this result, goes to a draw with Wahoo McDaniel. And Lord Blears gets a win over Mr. X.
Now, a couple of things we want to talk about in that tag team match. It's one fall apiece, 2 out of 3. Like I mentioned, always going third fall. Ed Francis and Ripper Collins are battling outside the ring, but not only outside the ring, Mike. They're battling under the ring, which is just classic. Can you imagine Ripper Collins crawling under the ring? Because I can't. And in the ring, Bockwinkel and Graham knock heads and knock each other out. And so it's considered a no contest because the others were underneath the ring and disappeared, and the other guys are just knocked out. And that's in the paper. McKenzie and Tanaka are billed as making their Hawaii debut, which actually isn't true. It was their Hilo debut, but not their Hawaii debut. And Tex, the big 6'9" Texas cowboy, will be greeting the kids at the door and handing out his famous Texas $100 bills to the first 500 kids. Mike, have you ever seen a famous Tex McKenzie Texas $100 bill?
No, I would like to see one of those. That's a great piece of memorabilia.
And he's giving them out not to the adults, but to 500 kids. See, that's smart booking. You bring the kids in because you're bringing the parents in. As you mentioned, it's a spot show and it draws 1,500.
Yeah, exactly. So, once again, smart booking, smart promoting.
We might have to go on an adventure hunt. And you and me going to go fly to Hawaii at Ringside and Rose City's cost, of course. Yes. And we'll go on a hunt for Tex McKenzie $100 bills. I'd like to find those.
Yes.
All right, Mike, that's enough sunshine for one night. As much as I'd love to stay in Hawaii sipping whatever it is that Lisa just handed us because my eyes are starting to blur. And reality is waiting because back here in the Pacific Northwest, there's no palm trees, but there is snow and there is ice. And there's a Portland sports arena trying to run wrestling in the middle of one of the coldest stretches the city has ever seen. So let's shake off the sand, pick up the leis, and trade in the island time for, snow time. Mike, take us back to Portland, where January of '69 wasn't just about wrestling. It was about surviving the weather just to get to the ring.
Yeah, once again, at the end of the month, we have some cards that are canceled due to that bad weather. I believe Corvallis, Oregon is canceled. Where we left off looks like to be about January 25th, 23rd. We're in Salem. Oh, this is where the card I jumped ahead to for just a moment. We have
you think I was going to let you skip over this card? I know you did this on purpose.
We have Luther Lindsay, Shag Thomas, and Cowboy Kirk beating the Von Steigers and Haru Suzuki in the main event.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about that card?
We have Lonnie Main beating Johnny War Eagle. And this is another step to get Lonnie Main over, beating a mid-carder, Johnny War Eagle, throughout Lonnie's previous run, Johnny War Eagle got an upset win over Lonnie Main. So this is Lonnie Main returning the favor for him. And also, Luigi Massera beats Tony Bourne on disqualification.
And I do love the six-man, which was Shag Thomas, Luther Lindsay, and as you mentioned, Bruce Kirk, not Eric Froelich, beating Kurt and Carl von Steiger and the Oriental, Haru Sasaki, because Haru really was fit in with the style of gimmickry and cheating that the von Steigers use. He fit right in, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a logical choice to be their third member of their team.
One of the things that's interesting to me is Lonnie is the heel, and at the end of the night, he challenges Lindsay for a title match, and Lindsay, for like the third time, turns him down, which is really unusual for the babyface, isn't it?
Yeah, that sounds strange because a babyface usually always accepts challenges. So yeah, that is interesting that that took place.
Now, the next night, they're in Eugene, and what's interesting about this is Lindsay defends the Northwest Championship against Lonnie Main, although he had just been turned down the night before. Kurt von Steiger and Johnny War Eagle, Carl von Steiger goes against Eric Froelich and Haru Sasaki versus Bruce Kirk. I can find no results for this. And one of the reasons I'm thinking is because people wanted to get home because the roads were being closed due to snowfall. And so if you're thinking I'm going to get home safe or get to the hotel safe, or I'm going to call in results, there are no cell phones. So they're heading into the car is all I can think about.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go ahead and jump to the 25th in Portland and what happened that night, because this is a big card.
This is a really interesting card. So we have NWH, we have Gene Kaninsky, and he is facing Johnny War Eagle in a non-title match. Now, that's a head scratcher because Kaninsky is a busy man traveling the country and the world, and he didn't really have a lot of time for non-title matches. So I'm a little unclear as to why this is a non-title match. Johnny War Eagle is an interesting opponent. I have a feeling that the promotion really thought well of Johnny War Eagle. He's only been wrestling now maybe 3 months, and they're putting him in the ring with the world champ. Maybe it's a test for Johnny War Eagle to see if he's ready to move on to other territories, to see what Kaninsky's opinion of him is. You know, we've learned in the last few episodes, certain wrestlers' opinions of other wrestlers really can be important for promoters to hear. So if War Eagle can get a good nod from Kaninsky, that might open up some doors for him. And you'd probably want a babyface to be opponent for Kaninsky. And as I look, they may have run another show on this night because Luther Lindsay is nowhere to be found on this card, nor is Shag Thomas. Now, the Von Steigers are here, so maybe I'm wrong in suggesting that, because that would be the primary match, the Von Steigers versus Luther and Shag. And so, yeah, you would think if they were really promoting a show to put the top match in there, it would have been Luther rather than Johnny War Eagle.
And I'm wondering if there were travel issues, because the paper said due to snowfall, the turnout for the show was very bad. In fact, the paper listed that the crowds for the whole month as very poor because the whole month was very cold and very snowy. Also on this card, you mentioned who wasn't here, but let's look at who was here. And Dutch Savage, who was quote unquote the rage of the East Coast, beat Sandy Barr, and Dean Higuchi, Dean Kalani, whichever name, beat Lonnie Main by DQ when Main was DQ'd for butting. So we mentioned that was illegal. That's not something that I would imagine I've ever remember Lonnie Main doing, is headbutting someone.
No, that is interesting. Maybe that was really prevalent, that they really worked to get that, how that's a dangerous maneuver. And if that's the case, they've given that to Lonnie to further make the fans angry at him.
Now, the paper described, he's talking about being angry. Lonnie was described in the paper as quote unquote obstroperious, I believe is how that's said.
Oh my gosh.
Which means noisy and difficult to control. That's a journalist who had if they had calendars of the word of the day, actually had to be using that, don't you think? I have never used that.
I have never heard that or used that. That's a great word.
And also on the card, Luigi Massera, who was quote unquote the popular Italian bone bender, drew Kansas City Butcher Boy. Now, besides that being a great name for Luigi, Kansas City Butcher Boy, they didn't say who that was, but obviously that's Bob Brown. Tell us a little bit about Bob Brown.
Bob Brown is remembered in the mid 80s as someone out of shape, over the hill, kind of mocked at that point in his career. That's how he's remembered. But in 1969, to be very, very honest, Bulldog Bob Brown was a heat machine, and he got pushed like crazy in Vancouver. He'd have wins over Don Leo Jonathan and Man Mountain Mike and guys like that. He got wins over Knitsky. He was really utilized there just as well as he could have been. And he is one of the most memorable heels that Vancouver ever had.
Bulldog Bob Brown. Yes, and he is featured in Encyclopedia Portland Wrestlers, isn't he, Mike?
Yes, yes, he is.
And that book's available on
Amazon.
Absolutely. So we talked about weather and how bad it was getting. So the turnout that night was bad because of the snowfall. And that had to really be when Don Owen is looking back at the whole month. He's had a sellout on Christmas night. He's had to cancel the January 1st big card. And now he's brought in Gene Kaninsky, who doesn't come in for cheap. And he's brought in Bob Brown and Dean Ho and Dutch Savage. So the card's pretty loaded, and yet they're not drawing very much. You think Don was maybe a little getting concerned at this point, Mike?
I think Don was a pessimist for sure, but he had to realize that this bad weather is not going to remain in Oregon for much longer because this is very unusual, a month long of bad weather.
Yeah, so that's probably what he's thinking on the 25th until he wakes up on the 26th and it's snowing even more. And then he tries to have a card in Corvallis on the 28th. And Mike, what happened to that card on the 28th? 3 days after the 25th.
Yeah, that card was canceled because of bad weather.
Yeah, but it's okay because on the 29th, he's going to have a card in Portland, isn't he, Mike?
He's, supposed to have a card in Portland.
But what happened to that card, Mike?
I believe that card was canceled as well.
That's right, because Portland got another 10 inches of snow that day. The newspaper just said Portland shut down. Now, as I mentioned, 3 inches of snow, Portland shuts down. 10 inches of snow, Portland really shut down. But it's not the end of the month, Mike. We still got 2 more days. So on the 30th, they're going to go to Salem. Now, Mike, do they have a show in Salem? And what happened?
I have some results, so they must have had the show. Lonnie Main finally gets his hands on Luther Lindsay in Salem on the 30th, and they go to a draw. The other matches on that card, we have Tony Bourne going to a draw with Kurt Von Steiger. Interesting because here we have this feud that has taken place in the past, and they're at least taking a look at it, even though Tony Bourne is a heel now. And also Carl Von Steiger beating Cowboy Kirk. We only have 3 matches, 6 wrestlers, so that bad weather may have hindered a few other wrestlers.
Yeah, because I-5, which is the main corridor between Portland and Salem, was actually blocked for hours by snow. No traffic was allowed through. And the paper said the crowds were, quote unquote, very small. So, I mean, Salem's not a huge crowd anyway, but for it to be very small, probably they were lucky to have any matches at all. But I think the Kurt Von Steiger versus Tony Bourne draw would have been really good. You mentioned heel versus heel. That would have been something where Tony has just been really turning heel. So that's still fresh for the Salem crowd.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been a very interesting match.
But at least they had wrestling. So, the next night, the last day of January 31st in Eugene, they had wrestling, didn't they, Mike?
I imagine they did.
No, they did not, Mike.
No, they did not.
Wrestling was canceled because of 18 inches of snow at the Eugene airport. Now, so you can't get from Portland to Salem, and then you can't get from Salem to Eugene or Portland to Eugene. So when you look at this, the 25th, very small turnout in Portland. On the 28th, the card is canceled. The 29th, the card is canceled. The 30th, very small crowd, only 3 matches. And the next night in Eugene, 18 inches of snow closes it out. That's not only bad for Don, that's tough on the boys, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, because Don's not paying him for matches that are canceled.
No, but you mentioned Don being the kind who he's going to push through. Matt Farmer has talked about in his interview in Ringside in Rose City, which all the fans, if you haven't listened to, you need to go listen to it. After this, go find that because it is a fantastic interview with Matt Farmer, wrestling historian and former pro wrestler. You'll learn things. Mike, you learned some stuff on that interview, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Matt's a great resource and person to talk to on the history of wrestling.
And I'll just give a little hint. If you need to know one fact that I learned in that, go find out how close Hulk Hogan was to coming to Portland, where we've made fun of Dizzy Hogan on his interview saying that his brother Hulk Hogan might be coming in, and we always thought it was a rib. But actually, it was pretty close. There was even a money agreement. But I'm not going to give you any more. You got to go listen to the Matt Farmer interview because it's spectacular. So it's tough on the boys, but Don is well off from his farm. And he could have gone and just said, nope, this isn't working out. I'm going to take my losses. But he didn't. And so February is still ahead. Mike, we can look at February and think something better is going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, that weather cannot keep lasting forever, and things are going to turn around.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, we mentioned that December felt like the end of a chapter, and January felt like everything was getting thrown up in the air. You've had blizzard shutting down Portland, cards being canceled, crowds shrinking because people simply couldn't get to the building. And yet, when shows did happen, the action didn't slow down one bit. You had titles changing hands. You saw the Von Steigers right back at the top of the mix, and you saw Shag Thomas stepping into a bigger role. And maybe most importantly, you saw the beginning of some real shifts. Tony Bourne starting his turn, Lonnie Main coming back and angry, and the kind of chaotic anything can happen booking that really kept us fans guessing every single week.
Well, if I jump in here for just a moment, you look at this line we've drawn at the end of January, and you're thinking about what's happening in February. January was a frustrating month, but you look at what's undoubtedly going to happen in February. You're going to have a series of Lonnie Main, Luther Lindsay matches. You're probably going to have Shag and Luther versus Lonnie and Tony. The Von Steigers are still right there. You're speculating you're going to see them versus Lonnie and Tony. The way with Lonnie Main coming back and getting into the main event mix, what a great February it looks to be.
Yeah, absolutely, because you mentioned the weather's not going to stay frozen forever. And if January was about survival, February might just be about opportunity. Mike, great history tonight. Any final thoughts?
Just that it is really, really fun looking back at and really analyzing, the results are there. Everybody can look at the results, but really looking at something like the weather and how important that is to this month in Portland history. It's so much fun to really, really analyze what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. And you look at our island interlude that we did with the big names that were in Hawaii, and even with the tragedy of the passing of Jim Haiti, it's a reminder of just how real this business is for the people living it, whether it's an incident like that or wrestlers not getting paid for a week, but still having to live. That was the wrestling business back in the territory days before guaranteed TV contracts. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can see that the wrestlers are really affected by nature here. We counted at least 3 cards. There's a lot of spot shows. There very well may have been 5, 6, 7 nights that were canceled throughout the month. And that's really going to affect them.
Absolutely. There were no cards east of Troutdale for sure during that time because of the weather. So Mike and I want to thank our listeners for joining us as we continue to tell the stories of the wrestlers, the arenas, and the fans who made Portland wrestling what it was. Remember, new episodes of Ringside in Rose City drop every Thursday. So be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And of course, follow us on X at Excitement Air. So until next time, I'm Frank Culbertson alongside
Mike Rodgers.
And this has been Ringside in Rose City. That's wrestling the way it should be. Lisa, go ahead and take us home.
And that's a wrap from Ringside in Rose City, where one ring, one city, and 1,000 stories never fail to deliver. I'm Lisa Hughes, and this has been a Yaski production. Catch every episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your wrestling fix. Until next time, keep your boots laced, your popcorn buttered, and your stories ready.